and welcome to the April Port of Los Angeles Media Briefing. Each month, we bring you clear data, analysis, and insight into the global trade landscape. I'm Chelsea Boyd from the Ports Communications team, and joining us, as always, is our Executive Director, Jean Seroka. It's good to see you, Jean.
You as well, Chelsea, and welcome, everyone. The world looks different than it did just a month ago. Developments in the Middle East are rippling across global trade, affecting risk, costs, and cargo flows. Much of today's conversation will be focused on this. But first, we'll start a little closer to home with our March cargo data, along with an overview of the first quarter and a look ahead. Then, to help us understand what's at stake globally, we'll be joined in studio by Dr. Jerrold D. He's a senior fellow at UCLA's Burkle Center for International Relations and the President Emeritus of the Pacific Council on International Policy. Few people understand geopolitical impact on global commerce the way Jerry does. And finally, as always, we'll have plenty of time to take your questions.
Sounds good. Thank you, Jean. Let's get right into it. Can you walk us through where we landed in March and how the first quarter of 2026 has shaped up?
Sure, Chelsea. In March, we handled 752,000 20-foot equivalent units. That's a strong result coming off of Lunar New Year in Asia, which led to 17 blank sailings. And even with that seasonal dip, we came in just 3% below last March, which was elevated as importers front-loaded cargo ahead of tariffs. On the import side, we handled just over 380,000 TEUs in March, just 1% less than the same month last year. Meanwhile, exports came in at 132,000 TEUs, 7% higher than last March. That's the highest output number for the export containers that we've seen in nearly 2 years. While encouraging, we have much more work to do to develop a consistent upward trend. Turning to empties, we handled 239,000 container units. That's down 11% last year. We'll be watching this very closely because it's a little bit lower as we expect to gear up for seasonal products coming our way. It's worth noting, numbers in the first 3 months of the year often fluctuate depending on where Lunar New Year falls on the calendar. That's why the first quarter as a whole tells a complete story. So let's look at that now. Closing out Q1 here in LA, the port handled 2.4 million TEUs. That's 5% lower than last year, which again was boosted by that pre-tariff uptick. Overall, this puts us right in line with our 5-year running average and shows steady, consistent movement at America's busiest port after a roller coaster 2025. As we look ahead to April, retailers are beginning to replenish seasonal goods, including spring and summer fashion. In fact, our Port Optimizer signal shows an uptick in business the last 2 months of April, with landings increasing and eclipsing 100,000 units in both of those frames. Based on that Port Optimizer and other data, I'm projecting April will land in the 800,000 TEU range, a solid start to the second quarter. However, with uncertainty in the Middle East and trade policy still unsettled, we're staying ahead of it, keeping up with events, and ready to respond to whatever comes our way. Just last night, I was touching base with a myriad of overseas ports across the Pacific Rim, trying to gauge how their volume flows are, how much cargo is sitting on port docks that otherwise would have been moving to the Middle East. Last week, I was in Chicago with over 100 ag experts, from ranchers, growers, decanters, and producers, trying to get an understanding of how all this trade policy and other geopolitical impacts are hitting them on the ground every day. And beginning Wednesday, I'll start another trip to China, beginning in Hong Kong, then up to Shanghai and out to Guangzhou before heading back to Los Angeles.
Thanks, Jean. You mentioned the impacts that tariffs had on cargo last year. Obviously, we're still in uncharted territory on that front. From your perspective, where do things stand right now?
Chelsea, there's a lot that remains up in the air when it comes to tariffs. First, the Supreme Court's February ruling struck down the sweeping International Emergency Economic Powers Authority tariffs, known as IEEPA, raising immediate and still unresolved questions about if, when, and how refunds may be processed. There's a whole group of companies lining up to recoup those funds, be it through litigation, legislation, or any other available channel. That's about $170 billion that many of us would like to see injected back into the U.S. economy. It's also worth noting that while the IEEPA tariffs were struck down, tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos remain, so industries are still navigating real cost pressures. Second, the administration responded to that Supreme Court ruling with a temporary 10% import charge under Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act. This has a 150-day limit. We're now on day 54, and so far, there's very little clarity on what happens when that clock runs out. And lastly, retailers are wondering what comes next in terms of purchasing, because at the heart of all of this is the American consumer. We saw inflation jump almost a full percentage point in March, and consumer sentiment is reported at a record low. So now the question is, at what point do families start to reconsider how much they're willing to spend? All of this is a reminder that uncertainty continues across the global economy, which limits planning horizons to a bare minimum.
Thanks, Gene. That is a great segue to our conversation with today's guests, and who better to help us make sense of all of this? Would you please introduce him?
My pleasure, Chelsea. Dr. Jerrold D brings a truly unique perspective to global affairs. For more than 16 years, he served as president of the Pacific Council on International Policy, where he continues to serve as senior fellow for the Middle East and South Asia. Today, Jerry's a senior fellow at UCLA's Burkle Center and serves as a global advisor to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center right here in LA. But what truly sets Jerry apart is that he hasn't just studied the region. He's lived and worked in Egypt, Iran, Israel, and traveled around the world. With that kind of firsthand experience is exactly what today's conversation calls for. Jerry, great to see you, and what a treat to have you in Studio 522 today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Let's start off with the bigger picture. You've also lived and worked in the Middle East. When you look at what's unfolded over the last several weeks and months, what do we need to understand as journalists, business people, and even concerned citizens?
I frankly am concerned about what's happening in the region. It seems to me that the Middle East and therefore the world has changed permanently. And even if we try and go back to where we were, it simply won't be possible. The Gulf Arab, the Gulf Cooperation countries, the GCC countries, really have taken a serious body blow as a result of this. And given their important trading partners, the Persian Gulf is uniquely important, and we're in a very challenging, difficult time.
Even in the middle now of a 14-day ceasefire, the news over the weekend that was shared that the U.S. wants to put a blockade in the middle of the Strait of Hormuz. What do you make of this?
Well, we're blockading the blockaders because the Iranians were blockading first. They were blockading who they wish to blockade. The U.S. wishes to blockade the ships that are the countries it wishes to blockade, and we are so far alone in our blockade. Washington has said that others will be joining the blockade. Nobody has raised their hand, so we're there on our own, which again makes it challenging. And the implications go far beyond the Middle East. If we're focused so heavily on the Middle East, who's paying attention to South China Sea? Who's paying attention to Asia? And so on and so forth. And that's really quite concerning.
And from the supply chain perspective, we're now in day 44 of the war with Iran. And on average, that means probably more than 4,500 ships have not been able to go east or westbound through that strait. It's going to take months to untangle the supply chain web, if we even get to a point where we can.
Well, and also there's from a negotiating perspective, there's a fire or an oil and fire quality between the Iranians and Washington. Washington likes to do things quickly. There's a sort of real estate mentality in terms of negotiating and doing deals. The Iranians like to do things very, very slowly. They like to do it in a protracted way. And often, and I've studied this and written about it, we say once the contract is inked, then the negotiations begin. With the Iranians, it's not linear, it's circumlinear. So Washington negotiates in one fashion, Iran negotiates in another, and the question is who's going to be in a position to absorb more pain, the United States or Iran. Iran survived an 8-year war with Iraq, so pain is not something new to the Iranians. And Washington is concerned about the midterm elections, the economy, the price of petroleum, agriculture, fertilizer, and so forth. So Washington is kind of in a hurry. Iran feels they have all day, and each side knows that about the other, which is, again, concerning.
Off of those comments, is this a moment or a temporary look at this unsettled nature that we see across the region? Because it's not just Iran, right? The Red Sea has had the Houthi rebels for years now. When I lived in the Middle East, it was the Somali rebels who were attacking vessels and commandeering crew. You've got all the bombing activity happening in Lebanon today. Do we see in our future more large-scale events that have real ripple effects across the entire globe?
Well, the Houthis control Bab el-Mandeb, and which is the Red Sea, and so the Houthis could try and blockade or certainly slow things down there at the same time. And again, taking a global perspective, as I know you do, given your work, you wonder, while all of this is going on, what's going on in Asia, not to mention Latin America. I mean, there were lots of problems, attacks by the United States on fast boats in the Caribbean, transporting drugs, Venezuela. In your business, particularly your industry, you need to take a global perspective. So while all of this is unfolding in the Middle East, as your question implies, one wonders what's being unattended to, what's at risk in the rest of the world. And it's a problem because we've gone all in on the Gulf. And the United States Navy, in my view, the deployments are too long. We have too many assets in the Middle East, and it's at the expense of what? And there are lots of at-whats that we need to be concerned about as well. So this is a serious problem. It looks Middle Eastern. It's absolutely global. It's absolutely global in scope.
Yeah, going down that path, a lot in the news is about shipping and what's not happening. Energy, prices, supply and demand across a variety of areas. I had a friend of mine, Bob Sinner from SB&B Foods, who visited Southeast Asia. The Vietnam folks he talked to were really concerned about the amount of days fuel left on hand there, as are other countries. We talk a lot about the ship crews that are stranded. Are we getting them enough food and medicine? So shipping, crews, energy. What else should we be concerned with? You peel back this layer by layer. What else don't we know just yet?
There is nothing that we should not be concerned about. Nothing. I mean, the production of pharmaceuticals, which leads to global health risks. Anything involving supply chains is being affected, and anything that humankind needs as a consequence is managed by supply chains. So everything is involved here. And what Washington is hoping is that the Chinese will be unhappy that not having access to Iranian petroleum, and therefore China will pressure Iran to make a deal more quickly with the United States. You will be in China next week. You can ask your Chinese counterparts. I would be very surprised if that would happen. The Iranians have become geniuses at working around sanctions. They've been doing it forever, as have the Chinese, So there is nothing here. I don't want to sound overly dramatic, but your question is a really important one. There is nothing here that is not at risk. Nothing. It's for me. I always think of the Port of Los Angeles as the carotid artery of the entity with the fourth largest economy in the world, which is the state of California. We're a country in terms of our economic reach and in terms of our global connectivity. We are closer to Mexico City than we are in Washington in terms of distance. We are a Pacific Rim entity, Southern California. So anything global matters to the Port of Los Angeles, but it also matters to the state of California. Electric cars are out of fashion, back and forth. They carry them back and forth. Now they're back because of the price of petroleum. This will affect you and your industry, but it affects all of us. Certainly the American taxpayer, American consumers, but consumers everywhere. Consumers in every country in the world are being touched by this.
And that underscores the focus of almost every business conversation I have, this instability.
Yes.
And whether it be on shores around the world or right here at home with erratic policy, it makes it very difficult for business people to plan. We've seen soft hiring numbers over the past year plus. We've seen inflation, albeit not runaway, still very high, even though companies are digging deeper to save costs. And the American consumer seems to be so consistent in their buying patterns. At some point, that's going to tip too, I would think.
No, you're absolutely right. And it seems to me that the economic consequences of this will have profound political consequences. Again, neither you nor I'm a political scientist, but I'm not political. I'm emotionally a business person, and you are a business person in terms of your day-to-day practice. Our responsibility is when handed lemonades to start squeezing and making the lemonade. And so the question is, how do we navigate this? And it's very, very hard. There's no certainty. Tariffs appeared to be behind us after the Supreme Court decision, which I thought that everyone sort of heaved a sigh of relief. Now the situation in the Middle East puts us back into terra incognita, the land of uncertainty, in a way that it's very, very difficult to plan for everybody in every industry. The Olympics, how are they going to be affected by that? That's local news. The World Cup, how is that going to be affected? Again, that's local news for us. But these are global issues, and all of them affected by what's going on in the Middle East. And again, if Iran handles this the way it tends to like to, which is very, very slowly dragging things out in a protracted way, hoping that Washington will blink, the implications for everything you've asked about and we've discussed will be profound and negative. Nothing good is coming out of any of this for anybody, including for the Iranian people. So it's a serious problem. We will be having this conversation again, I fear, in the not too distant future.
Right. And where business people are looking for a ray of hope, some continuity of process planning and investment, that seems to be very elusive as we continue.
Well, my son's in the toy business, right. and so it affects all of us. People in the entertainment industry, you name it, they are being affected. And planning is at the heart of any constructive human activity, including politics. But this is not the consequence of planning. This war came out of nowhere. Nobody predicted it. Nobody expected it. And it was a body blow. I know you've spent time in the Gulf, in Dubai and elsewhere. A body blow for our friends at the Gulf. Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, they've all been attacked by drones and missiles. We haven't. The homeland has not been attacked, but the homelands of our allies have been attacked. And so the trust that was there is gone. And so from my perspective as a geopolitical person, and you're sort of a geoeconomic person, there is profound uncertainty. The world has changed, and it will never go back. And when I talk to my friends in the Gulf, which I do regularly, they are going to have to invest much more heavily in defense because of their vulnerability to Iran. Their relationship with us is going to change. The Qataris are already talking to the Iranians, and it's not because of any ideological symmetry. It's because it's a neighbor who's much bigger than they are. So the implications of this are profound. far-reaching, and of concern to all of us, business people, but everybody is a business person. Unless you're living in the woods as a hermit, you're a business person. You have to be. We're all involved. And I don't see good news for anybody here.
Right. And these elevated prices on crude oil, over $100 a barrel now, when the extraction cost on land is a mere fraction of that. Keeping those prices elevated, when you talk about the damage that's been done around, especially the Gulf countries, the GCC countries. We saw the drone bombing of fuel tanks at Dubai International Airport, the Fairmont Hotel, which I used to go to, the LNG facilities in Qatar, right?
Yep.
And on, the Kuwait bombings. It's going to take money to rebuild this infrastructure, rebuild cities, rebuild communities. Keeping prices elevated may be part of this as well, right?
Prices are going to be elevated, I fear, in perpetuity, because it's not simply a consequence of supply, it's also a consequence of extraction. And when they rebuild Ras Laffan in Qatar, which is going to take years and cost billions of dollars, they're not going to rebuild it the way it was built the first time. Next time, it's got to be armored. It needs to be protected. They need to design it in a different way because Iran will continue to be a threat going forward. So the implications of this are really in perpetuity, because the world is a different place and countries are adapting to these differences, and the business community is left to try and figure out, what's this going to look like? What are the consequences? How does it affect their business? And they don't know, and nobody is telling them. Nobody is telling them. I mean, one of the disconcerting things about this war, no one was warned. No one was warned. Nobody told about it. Now the negotiations, Israel's involved in the war. Israel was not at the peace negotiations in Pakistan between the United States and Iran. So the Israelis were unhappy. Nobody is happy. There is nobody happy. The Russians and the Chinese, from a geopolitical perspective, as competitors with the United States, are deriving considerable satisfaction from this, because it diminishes the U.S. global role, trust in the U.S., perspective of the U.S. as a reliable partner. But even they're affected by this. I mean, Russia's making a lot of money. Russia is doing well. On the other hand, Orban lost the election in Hungary. Russia lost a friend in Budapest. Brussels is happy because Hungary is likely to be back in the EU camp instead of getting in the way. It's messy. It's unpredictable. There are victories, there are defeats, and then there are massive uncertainties. And for me, a massive uncertainty, this is because I'm a Middle East specialist, a massive uncertainty is a potential loss. It's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. Guessing is not a way to, hope is not a policy. Right. Guessing is not a way to run anything, a business, a government, a country, whatever we're talking about.
Spot on. What a great table setter, Jerry. Thanks. I know we have a bunch of questions from the media and a number logged in today. So Chelsea, back over to you.
Thanks, Gene. We have received some questions in advance, and I want to remind the journalists watching that if you would like to ask a question now, the Q&A box is open. Just please remember to include your name and your outlet. First question that we have here is for you, Jerry. I'm condensing some questions here that we had come in this morning. You mentioned those 21 hours of negotiations that happened over this weekend. No agreement was reached. What will it take from your perspective to get those folks back to the negotiating table to reach a resolve here?
Well, let me just say to all of the journalists that are watching, you have a huge fan in Jerry Green. Before my day begins, I have read 4 or 5, I guess they call them legacy newspapers today. And so thank you for your service. Journalism has become, and I'm not pandering, political scientists like me thrive because of the work that you all do. So thank you. In terms of the negotiations, again, and this may be an idiosyncratic view, I don't believe it was a negotiation. The Americans showed up with a plan, and they tried to persuade the Iranians to accept the plan, And when they left, Vice President Vance said they have not accepted our terms. We're going home. That is really not a negotiation. That's a reading of terms that were not accepted. Negotiations, as we all know, involve back and forth, a willingness to make concessions, horse trading, and all of that. So I'm not sure how much of a negotiation this was, or how much of it was a reading of the Riot Act, which does not work well with the Iranians. They have had the Riot Act read to them before, and it makes them stand firm.
Great. Our next question is from Rena Lee. This is for you, Gene. Rena is from China Daily. Rena asks, how might escalating tensions in the Middle East affect the feasibility of the Trans-Pacific green shipping corridors, particularly as energy security concerns and cost pressures risk taking precedence over decarbonization goals?
Thanks for joining, Rena. Appreciate you being here. You're right with your question, but what we've said before, and I think it applies really well now, is that at the Port of Los Angeles, we must invest through budget cycles, of which we'll bring our next year's budget to our Harbor Commission tomorrow at $3.5 billion US. We have to invest through economic cycles, and now we certainly have to invest through election cycles. Most of this work that we do here at the port, these infrastructure projects, the transition to a zero carbon shipping environment and port location, take years and in some cases decades. We're in our third decade now of the Clean Air Action Plan that was initiated by the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles back in 2006. And it's really interesting because it's never a straight line. We come up with some ideas, technology's got to catch up. When technology in place, finance has to be in the ready. And then when we get all of those moving together, if we have trade policy that changes or we have geopolitical eruptions like we're witnessing right now, all of that gets thrown into the soup and it makes it taste very different than it did before. But realistically speaking, our resolve has never been stronger, and we'll continue to work towards getting these renewable and synthetic fuels available at competitive prices for our shipping customers. We'll make sure that we continue our work with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power to generate, transport, store, and offtake green electricity, working with the hydrogen producers, et cetera. But I don't think this one point in time is going to dissuade us from continuing down this path with our sustainability strategy. It just made it an awfully difficult proposition, even more so than probably before. Thank you, Rena.
All right, our next question, we're going to stick with you here, Gene. This comes from Adolfo Guzman Lopez, who I believe is from the LAist. Adolfo asks, can you talk about how ships in Iranian ports, now blockaded by the U.S., not able to get out of this strait, ripples to the Port of Los Angeles? And also, what shipping presence do shipping companies in Pola, or in the Port of LA, have in Iranian ports? Gene, we'll start with you, and then maybe, Jerry, if you're able to offer just kind of a broader view of how that ripples to the U.S. overall, I think that would be good. Gene?
Thanks, Adolfo. Appreciate you joining today. The ripple effect is wide and far. We talked about just some high-level facts and figures. Every day going through that 21-mile Strait of Hormuz is about 100 to 110 vessels. That's all been stopped since February 28th, save a few ships that made it through, whether it be for negotiating purposes, maybe a couple of Iranian tankers and others, but nowhere near the level that we normally see in commerce and activity. The Middle East countries, especially the GCC, think of those in the Arabian Gulf, from Oman to the United Arab Emirates, northern part of Saudi, Kuwait, Qatar, Iraq. These are folks from a consuming level that look a lot like us. They're buying footwear and furniture. They're buying coffee and tea. There's products coming in from manufacturing hubs because they don't make a lot of product there. On the outbound side, much has been covered about fertilizer, Dubal aluminum, which produces just an unbelievable amount of product that goes around the world. So there are things that are just not moving right now. Store shelves are going to become much emptier. Inventory levels are plummeting. And the average person who's living in Dubai right now that I keep up with on a regular basis is having a difficulty buying perishable commodities. Think of fruit and vegetables, different meats and cheeses that you use just for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. Now, bring it up another level to the ports we share, because since February 28th, we heard from major shipping lines that they were going to cease operations to the Middle East, and especially those that went in and out of the Strait. That means that cargo is going to be on hold, whether it's at a factory floor level, in a container at a truck yard, or even at a port terminal. The reason I'm on the phone so regularly with our Asia port colleagues is to see whether or not that buildup of cargo on port terminals is going to get in the way or impede the product that's coming across the Trans-Pacific to ports like ours and our neighbor in Long Beach. So far, it's a concern, but it's not a worry. These ports and terminals have done a really great job of segmenting the cargo and making sure our Trans-Pacific business moves unimpeded. And please remember, the Trans-Pacific business is the most lucrative of any east-west trades for the service providers and shipping lines handle it. They'll go to great lengths to make sure those supply chains remain intact. But as Jerry said earlier, there's nothing that won't be touched or impacted by this escalating series of conflicts and the war in Iran that's happening right now. And that's why we've got to stay omnipresent with our partners here and overseas to understand what's going on so we can adjust. Thanks, Adolfo. Appreciate it. And on the note, sorry, before I let you go, on the note of U.S. interest in Iran, cargo has been embargoed. U.S. cargo, U.S. businesses, embargoes have been in place since just after the fall of the Shah in 1979. Save humanitarian cargo and some exempted cargo, there's very little trade between the United States and Iran. Mostly what you see is cargo with bills of lading destined for Dubai, and then a clean transshipment on a very separate and unique trade of corresponding documents that moves from Dubai to Bandar Abbas and into Iran with other products that don't have the fingerprints from U.S. soil. So that's a unique trade that's all been cut off right now because ships and their crew will not be moving while there's an active war on that front. Jerry?
Yes, and while this is going on, there are massive numbers of expat workers from India, from Pakistan, from the Philippines, from Sri Lanka, from countries all over the world who are living and working in the Gulf. As the Gulf economies constrict, foreign remittances back to these countries are shrunk and may disappear completely, which adversely affects the economies in these countries. So not only are these Asian countries adversely affected by inaccessibility to petroleum, which they desperately need, but they are losing foreign remittances, and they may have to absorb workers who are coming back from lucrative, by their standards, lucrative positions to positions that are no longer lucrative. There also are manufacturing, things do happen in the Middle East. There's a company called Rak Porcelain, which is in Ras Al Khaimah, which is the fourth emirate in the UAE. It's a joint venture between Ras Al Khaimah and Germany. They are the largest bathroom porcelain manufacturer in the world, which is nobody knows except people like me, I think. But it's a massive, massive industry. It's a very large country. They're not going to be able to conduct their business. So the airports, if trigger pulling starts again, the airport of Dubai and Doha, those are the two biggest, but there are others as well. They are major terminuses between the world and South Asia and East Africa. People go on safaris, they go through Doha and Dubai. So if those airports are affected again as they were, it will have a global impact. It's a supply chain of a different sort, a human supply chain, people moving to do business, visit families, or whatever. So this really is an important part of the world, and the implications are global. Everything is being touched by this.
Thank you both. Jean, this question is for you. It comes from Stas Margaronis. Stas asks, with ongoing Red Sea security issues, the Suez Canal has seen significant decline in crossings, along with high ocean freight rates and ocean carrier fuel charges. Do you see signs that U.S. importers from East Asia are shifting cargo moves to Los Angeles and other West Coast ports as opposed to East and Gulf Coast ports to save time and money?
Thanks for joining as always, Stas. Appreciate it, and a great question. For the past 3+ years, the crossings or receipts at the Suez Canal are down about 80%, mainly on the heels of that lack of security in the Red Sea, and as we've highlighted with those Houthi rebels. And the difficult thing here is that we also came off drought conditions in the Panama Canal. And with cargo migrating from China's manufacturing sector to Southeast Asia based on American trade policy, the norms of East-West trade, especially with the United States, have really changed, and so have those routes. We've talked a lot here about how the speed component is so important to our go-to-market approach at the Port of Los Angeles, and we've been keeping up pretty well. While China's cargo has dropped by 20 percentage points, going from 60% of our business portfolio in 2018 to about 40% now, we've continued to grow. Not only have we chased every pound of freight, but we've also seen the alignment with our shipping partners to get nonstop services out of Southeast Asian nations to make sure that that transit time is still very competitive with what they had been accustomed to in North Asia. And whether that's going to be finished products going to the retail or fulfillment centers, or parts and components for American factories, which have about an equal amount of container traffic, as do those retail goods. So all of that is important, and we've kept the numbers elevated because of those shifts in policy, the certainty of service that's come back, and now these geopolitical issues. The price of vessel fuel has doubled in the past 6 weeks. Slower steaming, less burn on fuel, shorter distances, all lead to probably more cargo coming our way. Thanks, Stas.
Thanks, Gene. Our next question is for Jerry. This comes from Sue Yoon of ABC News. Sue's wondering why we haven't seen prices go up yet aside from energy. If we look at March CPI data, is this similar to the tariff situation where businesses are trying to absorb costs amid the uncertainty? And then she follows up, it seems like the last oil cargoes will arrive in the U.S. this week. The last of Iraqi crude that departed pre-war arrived in L.A. on April 8th. So what happens after this week? Understand that the U.S. markets are somewhat insulated, but would changes suddenly occur this week or next? Could we see that?
This is probably a better question for Gene, but there is always a time lag. It takes time for things to catch up. So if the price of oil goes up today, we may feel it in 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. And the other thing is businesses are having to hedge on uncertainty. They're having to be very, very cautious. And even there's a lack of precision in pricing. But Gene, this really is I'm going to defer to you because this is how you conduct your business here. So
yeah, a couple things to keep in mind, I think, on this. And Sue, you're exactly right. Thanks for joining us from New York today. The price of fuel is set on a global basis. And so while 20% of the world's energy products are at risk with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, producing nations have made up about half of that 20% loss. So we're still in a decent position when it comes to supply and demand, but some countries are feeling the pinch. I represented earlier from my conversation with Bob Sinner about Vietnam. The U.S. is a net exporter of fuels. Generally speaking, supply is pretty good. We're not seeing long lines at pumps. We're not seeing rationing. We're not seeing any other staged effects at this point in time. But your point is very interesting because this is a conversation I had last week in Chicago with some policymakers that were visiting in town for the ag meetings. And while some companies want to immediately put a higher surcharge on the price of diesel fuel if you're a trucker or a railroad, you want to put a higher surcharge on the vessel fuel. You've bought some fuel at current prices. You have some hedging that your firm does. You've bought some contracts into the future before this war started. And now what you see in today's market or at the gas pump are the reality of today's prices, not necessarily what you're paying to put in your engine to move this cargo back and forth. And that's why policymakers in the U.S. have not just set a blanket terminology of putting these fuel surcharges on right away based on today's West Texas Intermediate crude price. So there may be some swings a little bit more or less on a daily basis, but realistically speaking, these futures contracts took into account that Iraqi barge that's coming in this week that left just before the war started on February 28th. A lot more to learn, and this is certainly a sector, Sue, that we really want to pay attention to. Thanks for highlighting it.
Gene, Sue had just a bit of a clarification here, so I'm just going to kick it back to you here. Sue says, I'm also talking about all prices, not just energy on consumer prices. If diesel, bunker fuel, and insurance costs are up, why aren't we seeing that, say, in grocery stores?
Well, we are, Sue, and according to various research studies, the price of coffee is up over 10% compared to last year. Furniture and footwear. Bananas, which we can't manufacture here. Chocolate, which we really do rely on international partners for, also up in double-digit fashion. Now, here's the interesting point, and we may hear this from the administration. As we head into the summer months, it'll be a year since the tariffs that were put in place the first week of April, the retraction of those tariffs, and all the capitulation that went on with these moving policies. Sooner or later, you cross that 12-month mark, prices are the same as they were. And you're not going to see that inflationary spike from April of 2025 to March 31st of 2026. So it's going to be interesting to see the way the math works out. And suddenly, while some experts have said inflation kind of goes away, well, the prices are still elevated. And whether it's healthcare, education, or the commodities we buy at the grocery store. Now, what our conversations in the business community are like are everyone has been scrambling to try to find workarounds against this erratic policy, to try to make ends meet better at home, to try to find ways not to pass on these tariffs to consumers and customers alike. Imagine where we could have been as an economy without this up and down roller coaster effect of the trade policy and the tariffs. Jobs have been soft for over a year. Inflation, while not runaway, has stayed a little bit higher than the Federal Reserve would like it for its two-sector mandate of creating jobs and keeping inflation at 2%. And how investment, capital investment in corporate America could have looked. Again, we're a little bit different when I say we invest through cycle as a government agency. We've got a really good bank account that we've been managing for years to invest in long-term infrastructure projects. Not every listed company has that ability. They've got to get quick wins. They're only as good as their quarterly earnings. And so far, hiring, inflation cost, and capital investment have been much weaker than many would like to see. So that's the question that remains. If we took away all of this policy, where could we have been as an economy?
Could I add one piece to that, if I may? If our economy is doing better than our allies, our friends, our trading partners, and theirs are declining, in the long run, it doesn't benefit us either. It's a very, very integrated, complex, global system. We're not an autarky. An entity that can live completely in a vacuum. We are inextricably linked to our trading partners, our allies, and our friends in every dimension. So to think about the national economy or the local economy and not think more broadly about the global economy can create problems all their own. So we certainly have to worry about the United States as Americans, but that doesn't mean we should be inattentive to other countries as well, because it will come back and it will bite us, and it has, and it does.
Thank you both. Gene, a question here from Lorianne LaRocco of G Captain. Lorianne asks, can you give any insights into how many foreign vessels are taking part in the Jones Act waiver that are coming into our port? Are they transporting jet fuel? What types of products?
Thanks for joining, Lorianne. And in brief, or in real layperson's language, the Jones Act allows U.S. flag, U.S. crewed vessels to call between states in the United States and our territories. Think of Puerto Rico. The administration about 30 days ago rolled back a waiver for the Jones Act to allow foreign flag vessels to call across states in an effort to help reduce prices at the pump. I don't have evidence of either. We had 170 vessels call the Port of Los Angeles over the past 30 days, 26 U.S. flag, 5 of which were container ships. I have not seen new entrants of foreign flag variety coming here and then going up to Portland or Seattle as an example of what this waiver was intended to do, carrying crude and refined products to help us lower prices at the pump. No evidence.
Gene, just a couple quick follow-ups from Lorianne here. She asks how soybean exports to China are looking right now, exports to China are looking right now. Have they increased? If so, by how much? And then she also asks about energy prices and the port. What are stakeholders telling you?
Yeah, on the soybeans, that was a big topic of conversation last week in Chicago with the Identity Preserve group that I joined, over 100 delegates that were there. And soybeans, we heard a lot back in November, Lorianne, and you covered this really well, that suddenly we were going to have a new deal with China and they were going to buy a bunch of soybeans. That has not happened. China, like other countries, have bypassed the United States in negotiations with third-party countries. Soybeans are now going to China from Brazil and Argentina and have been doing so for the better part of the last year. These contracts are typically longer. They're not transactional business. So we'll have to wait some time before China puts out to bid new soybean contracts because they're tied up right now. Almonds are moving out of Australia. And again, with the Central Valley of California in the fruit, nut area, walnuts, almonds, pistachios, big business for us here in California. We're feeling the brunt of these policies. And maybe it's not just retaliatory tariffs, but it's purposeful negotiation with other countries to avoid the U.S.
And then, Gene, just that last question there about the drayage costs and energy costs. What are those conversations like with stakeholders that you're having?
It's front of mind to everybody, from the line in the grocery store to getting a cup of coffee this morning in town, to the Elks Club when you're talking to friends and colleagues that work here on the docks. It's difficult. The price of diesel now is well above $7 here in Los Angeles, and in some sightings, we've understood that it's approaching $8 at this very moment. Truckers are feeling the squeeze. More than half of the 1,100 truckers licensed to do business at this port complex are small businesses, 5 rigs or less. They certainly are feeling the pinch right now.
Great. Thank you so much, Gene. That concludes the media questions for today. Back over to you for some final thoughts.
Jerry, what a treat.
Thank you so much for having me.
So insightful.
Oh.
And, you know, it brings me back to when I first got to Los Angeles. You were one of the first people to reach out and say, let's sit down, have a cup of coffee, and talk about how all this works together and where we need to go. And from there, you know, we turned around our finances here. We started putting the business back in the port. But it was that understanding of our role when it comes to international policy and how we're all inextricably linked. I give you all the credit for really illuminating my thought process and making sure that I get out there every day selling global LA.
Well, I must say, I must return the compliment, because it's when I was talking about journalists who I really rely on heavily to do my work, you are our lifeline to the world. You are the Port of Los Angeles is the window to the world. People see us through the port, and we see the world through the Port of Los Angeles, and I really mean that. And globalist has become, in some circles, a dirty name. Dirty word, and unfortunately, that's simply wrong. It is technically incorrect. It is wrong, and it undermines our values as a country, as a society. I mean, we are now experiencing brain drain. Scientists are leaving the United States to go to other countries to do work that they can't do here, and on and on and on. So, thank you for keeping the flame lit for our role, both as Americans and particularly Californians and Southern Californians, We worked very hard to earn our place in the world. It's something that's valuable, and we need to work hard to protect it. So thank you, and thank all your colleagues here and in your industry. Life would be pretty awful without you. So thank you for having me.
Certainly will, Jerry, and that motivation continues as I step onto the airplane on Wednesday to go over to Hong Kong and continue my trip through China. I understand the importance and the responsibility of these visits, and it's because of the great coaching I've received from you over the years we continue to do it.
You too.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you.
Finally, with Earth Day just around the corner, I want to do two things: extend an invitation and take a moment to reflect. First, please join us on Sunday, April 19th at the Wilmington Waterfront Promenade for our biggest Earth Day celebration yet. It'll be a day filled with activities for families and folks of all ages. There'll be sustainable arts and crafts, landscape and design tours, food, giveaways, and so much more. It's going to be a great day, and we'd love for you all to be there with us. And now for the reflection. The environmental progress we've made here, together with our partners and our community, is something I'm truly proud of. It's a shared commitment given us some of the cleanest air and water ever documented in our history. None of this happened by accident, and it certainly didn't happen overnight. The groundwork that was laid back in 2006 when we partnered with our neighbors in Long Beach to adopt the Clean Air Action Plan began it all. 20 years later, it's still considered a leading model for reducing emissions and is currently the longest-running, most detailed port emissions inventory program in the world. Since then, we've attacked emissions from every angle: ships, trucks, equipment across our docks, and yards. All of this work begins with our incredible environmental team here at the Harbor Department. They're the people driving innovation in air and water quality every single day. Our terminal partners have invested tens of millions of dollars into the latest zero-emission equipment and technology across our docks. Harbor craft like tugs, tour boats, and workboats are now all being upgraded to further reduce emissions. On the logistics side, our groundbreaking Clean Truck program has made real and measurable differences in air quality for the communities around us. None of this progress would have happened without the dedication and advocacy of our community. They've kept us laser focused on building a more sustainable port every step of the way. Because of that focus, our latest inventory report shows the lowest emissions ever recorded on a per TEU basis. That means cleaner air, safer communities, and real progress for the people who call this area home. We know there's plenty more work to do, and we know it's going to take all of us: the port, our partners, and our community. Together is how we got here. Together is how we'll move forward. Earth Day is just a reminder of that. Thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you back here again in May.